So, wow, this is case number 5,000 for me of AOC not understanding the basics of the Constitution or the rule of law. She essentially is saying that in order for Supreme Court rulings to be upheld or to be legitimate, they have to be enforced by the president, and that basically the president can just override what the courts say.
AOC declares open season on the rule of law, drama at the Tennessee State House, Jon Stewart grills a Pentagon spokesperson, and some anti-capitalist TikToks. I'm Brad Polumbo. You're watching the Base Politics Podcast. Let's jump into it.
So guys, I am coming to you from my daddy's office this week in South Carolina. I'm still here for the Easter holiday. Brad, I know you probably don't really celebrate Christian Easter at least, but did you have a good weekend?
Yeah, we got together with the boyfriend's family, did a little Easter egg hunt for some of his young cousins. So yeah, it was lovely. And it's finally getting warm here in Michigan. So Michigan in the spring and summer is lovely. And that's why everyone likes to live in Michigan. But it's just a rather short season. So we're finally getting to enjoy it a little bit.
Well, that's good to hear. We had Rory, my niece's 1-year-old birthday party this Saturday. And it went from being like a horrific day. I think it was in the 30s, 40s, raining. Phoenix didn't even want to go outside to walk. And then Easter, it was bright and sunny. And it kind of felt like we'd come through the hopefully last of the winter days. So fingers crossed, we'll see. I went and saw Cats on Sunday night with my my parents and my sister. My brothers had to go back, but I've never seen Cats. It was a different musical. Have you ever seen it?
No, and I'm not a musical guy, as you probably know, so.
I mean, you like High School Musical, so you never know.
It's not quite the same.
It's not quite the same, but I'll say this. If you haven't seen Cats, I'm a huge geek. I did musical theater growing up. I've seen a ton of Broadway shows. Been very fortunate to get to see so many. Cats, a lot of shows are very music-driven. Many shows are very plot-driven. Cats was neither of those. I honestly felt like maybe it became popular because so many people were on drugs in the 1990s. It didn't make a lot of sense. Basically, it was a bunch of cats competing for one to go to heaven, and they just kind of introduced the cats, but it was a very movement-driven show. So very impressive choreography and dancing and gymnastics, and that was interesting to watch, but a unique Broadway experience. So my dad actually fell asleep during the show, if that tells you anything.
Wow.
He did not like it.
Well, I also have a bonus piece of trivia for you, Hannah. Did you know that we're currently on day 1,120 of 15 days to slow the spread?
I didn't. How's it going? Are we close?
Well, President Biden just allowed today, or actually Monday, but the emergency declaration to finally lapse 3 full years later and about 2.5 years after it should have.
Oh my God.
And I am probably going to make some short content about this, but it's just such a good reminder of why emergency powers are such a dangerous thing, because they're always going to drag out the emergency or find new emergencies when that literally gives them expanded money and power.
Absolutely. You're kidding yourself if you think it's anything less than that. And I mean, I think the sad thing is most people know that. They just don't care, especially when they're afraid for their safety. They're like, please, Big Daddy government, come save me. Do whatever it takes to prevent me from getting hurt or ill. And it's just, I don't know. It's a little bit delusional. Maybe find religion, instead of government. But anyways, well, we have a pretty big story at the top of the hour. And it seems that while they might like big government, they don't always respect the rule of law when it comes to people on the left-wing side of the aisle.
No, they don't. And what's happening right now is basically there was this very controversial federal judge ruling on an abortion medication. I'll probably botch the pronunciation, but mifepristone. And so a federal judge on Friday ruled to block the FDA's authorization of this abortion medication. And of course, this is a legal case where you have pro-life people who want to block this medication so they can block abortion, and they think it's dangerous, whereas the FDA cleared it and said it's safe, and pro-choice people want it widely available. And we're not going to necessarily wade into the actual merits of that, both because it's a sticky subject and also because we're not experts on drug efficacy and safety. But we want to talk about the political response to this ruling. But just first, here's from the Wall Street Journal. A federal judge on Friday suspended approval of the abortion pill in a preliminary ruling against the FDA that could limit women's access to the most common method for ending a pregnancy. U.S. District Judge Matthew Kacsmaryk of Amarillo, Texas, said in a 67-page ruling that the FDA made a series of legal errors in approving the pill for sale in the U.S. The judge suspended approval of the drug, known as mifepristone, but delayed the impact of his decision for a week while the Biden administration appeals and seeks an emergency stay. The judge said anti-abortion challengers who sued the FDA were likely to succeed on arguments that the agency followed an unlawful approach when it allowed the pill onto the market using a pathway intended for drugs to treat serious illnesses. He also said that the agency failed to appropriately assess the drug's safety. So again, we're not going to litigate whether that's right or wrong because we don't really know, and it's a complicated case. A lot of people are very mad about it, though. So, Hannah, we have here some responses from Democratic members of Congress, right?
So, yeah, to kick us off, we have Ron Wyden, who I actually tend to like on things like Section 230, but he said this devastating ruling has no basis in law and will ban the most common method of abortion in every single state. President Biden can and must ignore this ruling and keep mifepristone, you did a much better job at that than me, on the market and accessible for every woman in America. And then we also have a clip from one of our favorite congresswomen. I'm joking. AOC. Let's roll this.
There has been thought, I believe, given to this. Senator Ron Wyden has already issued statements, for example, advising what we should do in a situation like this, which I concur, which is that I believe that the Biden administration should ignore this ruling. I think that the courts have the legitimacy and they rely on the legitimacy of their rulings. And what they are currently doing is engaged in an unprecedented and dramatic erosion of the legitimacy of the courts. It is the justices themselves, through the deeply partisan and unfounded nature of these rulings, that are undermining their own enforcement.
So you're saying the Biden administration should ignore this court, but what does that look like? What does that actually mean?
I think the interesting thing when it comes to a ruling is that it relies on enforcement. And it is up to the Biden administration to choose whether or not to enforce such a ruling.
So, wow, this is case number 5,000 for me of AOC not understanding the basics of the Constitution or the rule of law. She essentially is saying that in order for Supreme Court rulings to be upheld or to be legitimate, they have to be enforced by the president, and that basically the president can just override what the courts say and get away with it, and there will be no consequences whatsoever. That's not how things work, and I certainly don't think that's how she would want things to work in almost any other area that the courts are deciding.
Yeah, it's just so insane. So what they're she's actually not wrong that the Supreme Court has no actual enforcement mechanism, because it is up to the rest of the branches. Like, they don't have an army, right? They don't have a police force to go force a governor to follow a ruling or force the president. But people have always respected the Supreme Court because the whole system would very quickly crumble if they didn't, right? We have our checks and balances. We have our system of government that keeps the other branches in check, but it relies on these norms and this deference to rule of law that they want to nuke over one decision they don't like about an abortion drug. Now, the proper response, if you think this decision is bad and wrong, and who knows, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, I don't really know, is to appeal it, right? That's literally the point. Take it to an appeals court and then to the Supreme Court and win. And you may well win. But this idea that one ruling you really don't like, throw out the whole bath water or the baby with the bath water and just disregard our court system. If you do that for one case, anyone can do it for any case, right? And think of how many times it's so incredibly reckless and irresponsible and short-sighted. Because think about how many times these resistance Dems blocked Trump when he was president from doing things by taking it to the courts. They blocked his attempts to limit Muslim immigration. They blocked his attempts to rescind protections for dreamers, immigrants. They blocked him from his administration's position on LGBT rights. They won time and time again at the court. Even Trump's own appointees, like Neil Gorsuch, according to WAPO, less than 40% of the time sided with Trump. And at the lower courts, according to the Washington Post, the Trump administration only won 11% of the time when their regulations and stuff were challenged. So the Democrats have been able to use the court system to keep Republicans in check when the Republicans are in power. but only because there are these norms and this deference to the rule of law that say we will abide by court decisions. We'll fight it out on policy merits. We'll appeal if we don't like it, but we won't rip up the rules just because we're throwing a tantrum over one decision we don't like. Now, if they did that, if they nuked that, that would come back to bite them so soon when a DeSantis or whoever it is, Republicans are back in charge, and all of a sudden the courts are optional. I mean, it's like you would really nuke one of the biggest checks and balances on the federal government in just because you don't like one ruling. Seriously, people? Are they that short-sighted?
Yes, they have proven time and time again that they are that short-sighted. And I'll go back to something I've been pushing for a minute now, which is that Democrats hate democracy more than anybody. They are so used to being in the majority. They are so used to just being able to get their way that when they run up against opposition, the first thing they want to do is throw out any sense of normalcy, any sense of decorum, any sense of the rule of law or the Constitution. You see this when they lose a couple seats on the Supreme Court because they don't win an election, and all of a sudden they want to expand the Supreme Court. You see this when they want to throw out the filibuster. We saw that they did this to themselves a few years ago when they changed some other Senate rules that have been catastrophic for them, but they never learn, and they just throw temper tantrums. They want to pitch a fit when they don't get their way. They want to blow things up. I really think it's quite childlike, and then they're shocked when this massive hole that they blew through the wall of an actual democracy that's been structured for them, or a republic at the very least, is working against them. And Republicans start using things and going against them and hurting them with their own, bending of the rules. I think it is incredibly short-sighted and foolish. And like you said, not necessary. There are so many recourses that you have in this situation, right? Like, number one, appeal it. Number two, start working to get rid of the FDA. I can't stand the FDA. I don't think they should exist. I think they have really flimsy ideas about what's safe and what's not, and it's often very politically influenced. You could start working to have reforms on that end of this kind of issue. You could work to try to get some competitors to the specific pill on the market. You could work to make it easier for people to import drugs from other countries. I know that's one thing that's popular when it comes to abortion pills right now. The list goes on, but the fact that you want to instead say that the court is not legitimate when it doesn't rule as we want, and therefore we are going to basically undermine the very premise of the Constitution, the very premise of the rule, the very structure that allows us to have 330 million diverse people coexist mostly peacefully in a massive country with very different ideas, very different backgrounds, different ethnicities and religions and nationalities. It's more short-sighted than I can even completely encapsulate here, because without these basic premises that we were founded upon, you don't have a rule of law. You don't have a structure in which people can come together and get past disagreements and find a way to structure a society where most people can agree to live underneath it. And I think that is the most short-sighted part of it all.
Yeah, and also just think about how these same people were sanctimoniously telling us about the rule of law and democracy 5 minutes ago over January 6th. And they had a point. January 6th was an affront to the rule of law because they were trying to overturn the lawful results of, our constitutional order. That was their goal. But clearly these people don't actually care about any of that. I mean, you can never take AOC seriously on any of this stuff ever again. Same with the people who support packing the Supreme Court, which is literally what dictators do in banana republic. When the courts don't rule the way they want, just stuff them full of sycophants to skew the balance. So the Supreme Court, there's a reason Congress has an approval rating lower than the coronavirus, and the Supreme Court actually has a very high approval rating. And it's because the judicial branch, while it's certainly not perfect, and there's some serious systemic issues with it, by and large, it's gotten a lot of things right eventually, right? Like the Supreme Court, the current Supreme Court, I think more often than not will call balls and strikes. It will rule against. It's not some partisan court, and it's been a real check against excessive government power and overreach. But it can't be a check if you disregard it on the basis of one decision you don't like instead of just appealing it like you're supposed to. Because honestly, it sounds like this guy could probably get overturned and appeal anyway. So why even go here? It's so deranged. And that's why I have to, for a moment, we're honest here. We call balls and strikes. We will say it as it is. I was really disappointed to see somebody who I like a lot, who I'm generally almost always on board with, GOP Congresswoman Nancy Mace, agreed with AOC on this position. Take a listen to an interview she did on CNN.
Do you agree here then with comments from people like your colleague Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that the Biden administration should ignore this ruling, that the FDA should ignore this ruling?
Well, this is the judicial branch and we have a court system. I do think that this is going to be relegated to the courts. There are other lawsuits that are going on right now. This is an FDA-approved drug. I support the usage of FDA-approved drugs, even if we might disagree. It's not up to us to decide as legislators or even, as the court system that whether or not this is the right drug to use or not, number one. So I agree with ignoring it at this point, but there are other lawsuits that are happening right now in other states as well over this issue. But to look at the case itself, when you look at the law that the judge used, an old law that the Supreme Court said was unconstitutional, this thing should just be thrown out, quite frankly.
So look, I understand that Nancy Mace has some nuanced positions on abortion, and if she believes this pill should be available, I'm totally fine with that opinion. Doesn't really bother me. But for her to be on board with this defy the courts narrative really, really bugged me because I don't think she's fully thought this through. If this, for example, she has opposed a lot of the Biden administration's policies, their overreach, their vaccine mandate, their attempt to rewrite immigration laws, their eviction moratorium that seized nationwide rental properties, their environmental regulation that didn't follow the proper process and overreach. All of those things have been blocked by the courts, and they've been vital to keeping the Biden administration in check. But if the Biden administration can defy this judge on this, they can defy them on anything, and the courts can't serve. So I just thought it was really disappointing to see her not really thinking through the consequences of this. Even if she strongly disagrees with this ruling, okay, appeal it, advocate against it, try to work around it, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
So I was really surprised to see her say this, and I feel like her basic premise is coming down to the fact that this is a Texas federal judge versus the Supreme Court or something, which I think, again, just doesn't really seem to be super up to speed with how the courts work. Even if it is a Texas federal judge that is still a federal court, it would then go up on appeal if you wanted to appeal it and keep going eventually to the Supreme Court. This is how things normally proceed every day on numerous issues in this country. And if that's your premise for overturning this decision, then I just don't think that tracks whatsoever. I'm also confused because, to my knowledge, Nancy Mace has always been a pro-life person, and so I'm sort of, I don't know, to me it's weird to see her not only sticking her neck out on this issue, but doing it in such a way that would undermine the basic rule of law. So I don't know. I mean, whenever I see women across the board speak on abortion issues, as a woman myself, being privy to a lot of information of other women around me, like I know how many women are survivors of sexual assault. I know how many women have had to have abortions they felt at some time in their life, and there are a lot of emotions that go into these discussions. And I will just say, this is true for me too. Sometimes I get emotional on issues and you don't think as clearly as you would. And I know she has herself come out and said she is a survivor of sexual assault. So I'm going to, maybe give her a bit of a pass on this one and hope that she just hasn't fully thought it through all the way, because I do think this is breaking with where you would usually find her on such matters.
Yeah, I'm never one to say one bad take means somebody is worthless now, right? But I just think she should really reconsider this, because when you find yourself agreeing with AOC on something like this, maybe reevaluate.
Maybe don't.
But more broadly, we just need our elected officials to understand why the rule of law is important, and to stop across the board, Republicans and Democrats, being so incredibly short-sighted. Because whenever they throw things out, right, like they nuked the judicial filibuster for federal judges under Democrats, but not for the Supreme Court. Well, okay, you open that door. The Mitch McConnell did it for the Supreme Court, and you got the conservative Supreme Court. It's like, didn't take long for that one to bite you in the butt. Same thing with now they want to get rid of the Senate filibuster. If they do, they might be able to pass a few laws that they can't get 60 votes on right now. But as soon as Republicans are in charge, there'll be all sorts of nationwide bills passing that couldn't have passed with a filibuster. It's like, think 5 steps ahead, people. Is all we're asking, but apparently that's too much. Now, up next, we're going to talk about some similar shenanigans and drama that's going down in Tennessee. Hannah, help me catch up to speed with what's going on with who are now being dubbed the Tennessee Three.
That's right. We have to talk about the case of the Tennessee Three, so let's jump in. As you'll probably recall, a few weeks ago, we covered the deeply tragic shooting at a private Nashville school that left 3 children and 3 adults dead. But events have continued to unfold from that in the state, and we think that we need to circle back on some of the fallout. So on March 30th, which was a few days after the shooting, hundreds of protesters gathered at Tennessee State Capitol in Nashville, calling for tighter gun control laws after the 3 9-year-olds at the shooting at the Covenant School were killed. It was the first day that the state's legislature had taken up bills since the shooting. Protesters lined the hallways before entering the galleries of the House and Senate chambers. They were chanting and shouting. And Republicans, who have a supermajority in the state, repeatedly tried to call order and get back to debating the bill at hand. But there were 3 representatives who were basically leading the protesters, and they ended up storming what's called the well, which is where the person leading the proceedings would stand. And they charged the well with a megaphone, and they began chanting with the crowd. And that eventually brought the state business to a halt. They had to go into a recess because they could not get order back in the chamber. The lawmakers that did that were 2 young Black male House members, Justin Jones and Justin Pearson, and an older white female House member, Gloria Johnson, all Democrats. And let's roll this video of a little bit of the ordeal. So pretty rank and file. I mean, nothing too crazy going on. But again, they weren't able to get order. They had to go into recess. And Republicans were pretty mad about this. I was watching a lot of it go down in my feed. I, of course, lived and worked in Tennessee politics for many years. So I had a lot of personal anecdotes that were on my Twitter feed. And the Republicans swiftly sought retribution for the actions and said that actions were necessary to avoid setting a precedent that lawmakers' disruptions of House proceedings through protests would be tolerated. And they filed a resolution to expel the 3 Democrats from their seats in the state legislature for quote, disorderly behavior. Within days, the General Assembly held a vote to consider the expulsion of the members, ultimately kicking both Pearson and Jones out, while Johnson, the white woman, held on to her seat by 1 vote. Now, this has, of course, created massive backlash across the country. This has gotten
Terrible optics.
Terrible optics. Kamala Harris, who is very rarely seen anywhere, popped up to condemn the actions. And as a whole, I waited to speak about this because I had a lot of conflicting thoughts. And you and I have been talking about this a bit behind the scenes. I've spoken a little bit about it on Twitter, but I want to really flesh it out because I think there is a good bit of nuance here to discover. But my first impression when I saw this video come up on my feed, while it is nowhere near the scale of January 6th, is that this is essentially the same kind of thing as January 6th. This is protesters who are showing up at a Capitol. They're disrupting a session. Yes, I want to be clear. They did disrupt session. I had many people try to say they weren't even in session. No, they were in session. They were debating a bill. They were trying to do the state's business. They were actually in the process of democracy. They did interrupt session. So that is a difference. They weren't just at the Capitol roaming around on a normal day. This was pre-planned. They had signs that were ready to go. And I think that as a whole, these people, while they weren't trying to overthrow an election, they were attempting to overthrow the will of the people. Tennessee is a solidly red state, no bones about it. It is a very pro-gun state, very pro-Second Amendment state. Also, no doubt about that. You can see in the kind of bills that the legislature passes every year. This is actually one of the legislatures where you're actually allowed to bring a gun into session, which I appreciated as a young lobbyist because I often had to walk back to my car in dark alleys late at night. But when they say like this isn't that close to January 6th, I definitely disagree. I mean, you didn't see people become violent, but the majority of the people at January 6th were not violent, right? You had a couple, I think, fringy people there who were, and most of these people were just dumb and misled and were kind of taking a tour around the Capitol. So what are your thoughts on that point? You know, does this differ from January 6th? How do you feel about that? Because I got a ton of blowback for saying that on Twitter.
I did slightly disagree with you. I think I get what you're saying. It is similar in type, but I think it's not similar in severity as January 6th. So it is hypocritical if you oppose January 6th strongly to then be okay with storming a Capitol and disrupting democracy. I guess the 2 differences I'll say is 1, January 6th was a lot more violent than this. So if you remember, it's kind of been memory hold, but over 100 police officers reported injuries after January 6th. It's like dozens of them were badly hurt by these crushing people forget how out of control the mob got at January 6th. And it was, I think, it did cross the line more than this did. The other thing is, I think the goals are, I disagree with both goals. The goals of the gun control movement and the goals of overturning the election. But I do think the gun control goal motivating them is more legitimate. It's more within the bounds of fair political discourse than overturning, like violating the Constitution to overturn an election. I don't know. I got your point, but I wasn't fully in agreement for those reasons.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. A couple pushbacks I have is, I'm sorry, just to be honest, I always sort of doubt the accounts of cops. They get more money if they're injured. They're mad that anybody ever oversteps their authority, and they lie a lot. So, I don't really believe that many cops were severely hurt on January 6th. I saw plenty of footage. It didn't seem to be that severe. The one person who was seriously harmed and killed was a protester themselves. But I'll give you that it was a different scale of event, and definitely there was some violence at January 6th, whereas there was very clearly no violence at this event. So they're different in that way. But as far as disrupting a legislative session, whatever the end goals are, that's not how we do things in this country. That's not how you get things done. And so I think, overturning election, obviously a bad end goal, but those people legitimately thought, because they were lied to, that the election had been stolen, it was fraudulent. And I guess, if you really put yourself in that mindset, while I think they were obviously misled and could easily have found out different if they'd done basic research, I guess I do understand the fear and concern and what would you do if you actually did think America's elections had been stolen and our country was just gone, So I kind of get the instinct being on scale with people who really feel guns are a threat to people's lives. You have to do something, but no matter what your feelings are on either of these matters, that is not how we handle things in a constitutional republic. We have a process. We have a methodology. You might not like it. It might not be the most expedient process available to you, but it is there. And either way, in both scenarios, people who were elected by voters who were sent there to represent the will of the people were trying to do just that and do the state's business or do the government's business. And they were interrupted by people who refused to let that go down. And I just can't imagine if you had Marjorie Taylor Greene leading the charge on January 6th with a bullhorn, what the left response to that would have been, because that's kind of the scenario that you found yourself in here. But that all being said, I have to say that I'm conflicted on this more so because of the massive hullabaloo the left had over January 6th, calling it the worst day in our country since 9/11, spending countless taxpayer dollars investigating this.
Some of them have said it's worse than 9/11.
Yes. And
some have said it's the biggest attack on our democracy since Pearl Harbor, which ignores 9/11.
Yeah, they kind of forgot that one. So I think if you are going to be in that camp and you're going to say that these kinds of events are such a massive, horrific event and occurrence, and you're going to try to have all of these repercussions for participating in January 6th, and let's be clear, they're continuing to very stringently prosecute people just for being there. Even people who didn't go inside the Capitol are being charged very heavily at times. Some of these charges are unjust. So kicking these lawmakers out, I'm I kind of think it's a pretty apples to apples comparison here. And because I think these lawmakers, being Democrats, would be totally in favor of all that response to January 6th. So I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for them getting kicked out over their actions. But I'll say this, I'm not sure that's my standard. I am not sure that I am of the same mindset that you should not be able to protest at state capitals or disrupt legislative sessions. Now there's a line, right? There can't be violence, and at some point you do have to let the state get back to business. But as a citizen, I think protest is important. I think protesting to the government itself is important. And I do think there are times that warrant the people showing up at their capital and intervening in matters where the people who they sent there are not doing their jobs, are not honoring their wishes, are not listening to them. I don't think this certainly did not rise to that occasion, because the will of the majority of people in Tennessee is not that of the protesters. But that being said, my line on this is a little bit murkier than where the Democrats are. And so for those reasons, I don't think it's a double standard for me to say I don't think most of the protesters at January 6th should have been charged. And I don't think these members probably should have been expelled for this.
I thought expelling them was always likely to backfire. And it seems like it has, right?
Yeah. Well, and I want to go over a few things because some of these people are known to me. So that also colored my experience here. And I'm sure it did that of many Republicans on the ground. Justin Jones is an activist. This is a guy who, since he was in college, has been trying to get his name in the paper, doing stunts like this long before he was ever in office. He thinks he's the second coming of Martin Luther King Jr., but actually, I think he's just incredibly inefficient and does not have the same tactics as Martin Luther King Jr., and therefore fails to raise the goodwill and build the coalitions and actually get change done like his predecessors did. I mean, as a whole, people need to pick a lane of influence. It's fine to be an activist. It's fine to be a showman. It's fine to be, a traveling preacher who riles up crowds and tries to stir the culture to change. But that's not the job of a lawmaker. So if you want to be a lawmaker, your job is to go in and convince your colleagues to vote with you and to find legislation that can get enough people to support it, to pass it and have deep conversations. It's not pulling stunts like this with megaphones. This is what people who don't have any power do. If you're in office, you should be able to find better avenues to actually get change. If you really claim that you're trying to, save people's lives, then why are you doing the least expedient thing possible to get there? So to me, I thought this was a lot more on his end about fundraising, and boy, have they. I thought it was a publicity stunt. I thought it looked really bad. I thought they were elevating themselves over the victims and their families. It seemed very self-seeking to me. So I really disagreed with all their tactics, but they are spinning this in a way that I will say I think is gaining some traction in the public view. Let's roll this clip briefly.
It is no coincidence that the two youngest black lawmakers in the state of Tennessee and one or two women are on trial today. That is not accidental. This is what happens when you lose democracy. This is what we are fighting against and must stand up against as legislators and as people and as citizens across this country.
So he says it's no coincidence that the two youngest black members and a woman are on trial today. And I agree, it's not a coincidence. It's because you were the guys who stormed the well and disrupted an entire day of session. And he goes on in that clip to basically talk about how this is a threat to democracy. But what they did was attack democracy, because democracy was going down in that chamber as lawmakers were debating a bill and trying to discuss it. And they repeatedly asked for protesters to be quiet in the chambers. They repeatedly asked for these lawmakers to settle down. And then they did the opposite. And so I can't stand this victim narrative that they're claiming now. But that being said, I think it's largely working. This has definitely been painted as a racial justice issue. It looks even worse that they ended up expelling the two black men, and the white woman held onto her seat by one vote. Now, I think that's because she showed up with lawyers on the day that they were voting on these things who actually argued her case much more effectively. And she also did apologize. And I also just think she's been there a long time. I think she has a bit more goodwill with some people across the aisle, and she managed by one vote, again, to not be kicked out. But the way this looks to the outside is really bleak. And I will say that they do have a leg to stand on when it comes to how often Tennessee has expelled people. Because let me tell you, I work the Tennessee legislature, one of the seediest places I've ever worked. And I've now worked dozens of state capitals. Tennessee was crazy. And I was like a little baby, Politico, when I was working there. So I didn't know how crazy it was. I thought this was just politics. No, there are all kinds of sexual scandals, money laundering scandals. Even 2 or 3 years ago, right when I was leaving Nashville, the then Speaker of the House got caught up basically in these text threads with his chief of staff talking about cocaine and sleeping with women in bathrooms and hitting on interns, and he did not get expelled. And then it came out that the chief of staff got fired. And then they started this money laundering business where they started a direct mail campaign company under a fake name and pitched it to other lawmakers to get them to use this service with their tax dollars so you get a certain allotment per legislator. And basically allegedly, this is still going on, but essentially it looks like they were taking money from the taxpayers through this whole scheme. And they're now both facing federal charges, but he wasn't expelled. He was kicked out of his speakership, but he was not expelled. And there have been a number of incidents like that I've seen over the years in Tennessee. So I do think this looks particularly bad for Republicans. These guys have now gotten everything they wanted. They've gotten a ton of national attention. They're raising money like crazy. I don't think this is going to play out at all how Republicans thought. I thought it was kind of them pitching a hissy fit in response to a hissy fit. And that's what we're talking about earlier. I think you have a lot of people that just act like petulant children when they don't get their way. They don't know what to do except pitch a fit. They don't know how to have conversations. They don't know how to compromise. They don't know how to work together. And that's been the case most of the time I've been in politics. I just hear stories about the days when people, used to get along and actually like their colleagues across the aisle and have conversations. And I think we were healthier as a society for that. Lastly, I'll just add that Justin Jones has already been reinstated to his seat. It's been under a week since he was expelled. But last night, Nashville's Metro Council basically called a special meeting, and they voted to install Jones as its own interim successor, effectively giving him a seat back for the time being. And there will be a vote to reappoint Pearson to his seat on Wednesday, according to Shelby County Board of Commissioners Chairman Michael Lowry. So as a whole, I mean, this is just a clown show, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's an absolute clown show. I do want to push back on one thing he said when he said we're being expelled for peaceful protests. Obviously, that's not true. They're being expelled for disrupting the official services, the official procedures of a government body, right? They disrupted it. They blocked it from continuing. That's not peaceful protest. That's disruption. So I thought that was BS. I think also the racial narrative of they expelled the 2 black men and not the white woman, I agree optically that's really bad. It looks really bad, but I actually think there's no there in that she survived by 1 vote. Almost all of them voted to expel all 3. Only a few defected to keep her, and she was the one who had been somewhat apologetic of the 3. So it's like, optically, it does look very bad. I will just admit. I'm sorry. It looks really bad.
Yeah, and she's been there 10 years. So, you can't discount, she probably has a lot of friends that she's worked with who are Republicans who like her personally and, were willing to kind of cross over. Both of these guys, I'm pretty sure, were freshman lawmakers. So, and they clearly were not cultivating any goodwill or forming relationships across the aisle.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, I think the decision to expel the 2 of them and not her is not as nefariously motivated as a lot of people have made it out to be. But I do think it was a complete cell phone. It was always clear they were going to probably get reinstated. So you just handed them this huge fundraising thing and made them martyrs. And meanwhile, like you pointed out, I've seen a lot of stuff about, I don't have a lot of familiarity with the Tennessee state politics, but I've seen a lot of stuff about people who weren't expelled, who did very bad things. So you can't have these double standards. So I think it was a big mistake. I think it's largely backfired for the Tennessee GOP, but I think the whole thing is kind of a clown show. I think it's tremendously disrespectful to the victims that these Democrats have made themselves the victims in the stories. And I think the whole thing is just kind of a big fat joke.
Well, let's move on to some hopefully lighter content with our Quick Hit segment. First up, we have a clip of our favorite comedian / Politico wannabe, Jon Stewart.
All right, so Jon Stewart recently interviewed for a C-SPAN event Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks, a Biden official, and he pressed her on the fact that the military has not and cannot pass an audit. She got very testy and didn't really like this. So take a listen to this clip.
There is a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse within a system.
Audits and waste, fraud, and abuse are not the same thing. So let's decompose these pieces.
Then please educate me on
Sure.
What
so an audit is
difference.
Exactly what you just described,
Yes.
which is, do I know what was delivered to which place?
Right.
The ability to pass an audit or the fact that the DOD has not passed an audit is not suggestive of waste, fraud, and abuse. That is completely false right there. So
what is
now
it
it's a question of it's suggestive that we don't have an accurate inventory that we can pull up of what we have where. That is not the same as saying we can't do that because waste, fraud, and abuse has occurred.
So in my world,
yeah,
that's waste.
How is that waste?
If I give you $1 billion and you can't tell me what happened to it, that to me is wasteful. That means you are not responsible. But if you can't tell me where it went, then what am I supposed to think? And when there has been reporting, I mean, this is not, look, I'm not saying this is on you and that you caused this, but I think it's a tough argument to
I'm pretty
make
sure
that
I didn't cause it.
an $850 billion budget to an organization that can't pass an audit and tell you where that money went. I think most people would consider that somewhere in the realm of waste, fraud, or abuse because they would wonder why that money isn't well accounted for.
So look, we've disagreed with Jon Stewart in the past plenty, but he has some points here, and she really comes off so condescending and so ill-prepared. I mean, think about what she admits here. The United States in 2022 spent $108 billion on our military budget. That's more than China, India, the UK, Russia, France, Germany, Saudi Arabia, Japan, and South Korea combined. I mean, it is a jaw-dropping amount of money. And she's just nonchalant about the fact that they can't tell us where it went. That's what she says. She says the fact that we can't pass an audit is because we can't tell you where all the money that we've spent has gone, and like we can't show you, we don't have accounting, right? Like we don't have paper trail for all the money we've spent and all the things we've done with the taxpayer dollars. And she says, but that's not suggestive of waste or fraud or abuse. And it's like, excuse me, I mean, sure, we have lots of other evidence of waste, fraud, and abuse. We left behind $7 billion worth of military equipment in Afghanistan for the Taliban to arm themselves with. So we have lots of other evidence of that. But isn't it bad enough in its own right that they spent over $800 billion and they can't tell us what the heck they've done with it?
Well, as Stewart points out, of course that is waste, right? If you cannot figure out what you're doing with the money, then certainly some of it's going to waste. But I also think it is indicative of fraud and abuse, because people who are ethical with their money, people who are trying to do the right thing, are keeping tabs on where it goes and understand that if you're not following where the money's going, it's probably going to get used for bad purposes. It's probably going to get used towards things that it doesn't need to go towards. I mean, it's ridiculous for her to try to make that distinction and then to watch her be so pretentious and giggle about the fact that they can't track billions of taxpayer dollars, that they cannot say if those taxpayer dollars are even being used in ethical ways, that they're not being used to harm people, that they aren't being used to enrich people. It's so, infuriating. And I think that this is the problem people really have with these people in government agencies is there's no accountability for her. There's no accountability for people in her positions. And she's sitting there laughing about it because there's no repercussions and she knows it.
Yeah, she does. And to me, this is just everything that's wrong with the military, our wasteful and bloated military in a nutshell. The fact that they feel entitled to this insane amount of money every year, and even the other federal government agencies, which are quite wasteful, can at least tell you where the money went. Right? They have passed audits, because passing an audit doesn't actually mean that you're not doing anything wrong or wasting the money. It just means you can tell us, okay, we spent $5 on pencils, $5 on apples, and $5 on oranges. That's where our $15 went. That's all passing the audit means in this context. And they can't even do that. It may well be that there's no need for them to be purchasing apples, right? So that's complete, or they threw all the apples away and it was wasted. They can't even pass this basic threshold of accountability. And yet, most people in both parties are just willing to heap more and more money to them every year. Like, I think the national defense is one of the core, legitimate, important functions of a federal government. But why do we need to spend more than the next 8-9 countries combined, especially if we're going to spend all that money and then not even be, they're not even going to do us the favor of telling us how they're spending our taxpayer dollars. To me, it's outrageous.
Well, it's like I said earlier, it's the illusion of safety. They keep telling people, if you don't do this, you're going to be attacked. Meanwhile, we're waging a proxy war with the nuclear power, but they're definitely keeping you
but
safe.
Also, like, the UK is safe, France is safe, Germany is safe, Japan is safe, and they're spending the frickin' tenth of what we're spending.
Well, because we're covering their butts. But yeah, I mean, point taken. I totally agree. But yeah, I think as a whole, Americans have got to wake up to some of this, especially on the right. You know, if you claim to be limited government, you claim to want to see individual liberty, you want to keep more of your tax dollars. I promise you nothing meaningful changes until you start cutting this budget. The defense budget needs to be cut. It needs to be slashed. There needs to be more accountability. A lot of these agencies need to go. We need to get out of most of these countries we're involved in. There's no real workaround. That's the plain old hard facts, and people need to start paying a bit more attention and quit just, you know, it's kind of this patriotism that they push on all of us. Like, hug your military members when you see them, thank them for their service. It's like this feel-good thing that they've made patriotic, when in reality, it's super corrupt. Most of this is not going towards anything close to keeping you safe. Most people who leave the military will tell you that they were used and abused by the military too, and were misled on their missions. So I'm just tired of them.
So sorry to interrupt, but Jon Stewart points out elsewhere, I watched this full interview, that a shocking percentage of military members are on food stamps, right? And so the idea that they're using all this money to compensate our troops is simply not true.
No. And I will say this for him, I disagree with Jon a good bit on a lot of policies, but he is somebody who actually means it when he says he supports the troops, and he does a lot of work actually trying to, like, look out for them and elevate what happens to them under the system. So I do give him kudos for that. All right, let's move on to our next clip. We've got to get into some TikTok hot messes that Brad and I stumbled upon this week. Let's roll the first one from a very anti-work young woman.
There is no way that you're going to tell me I'm going to work my whole life. I'm going to sit behind a desk and work 9 to 5 each day of my life until retirement. There is no way that is what life is about. I will not be put in that box. I'm sorry. I just realized a little bit extra. Ooh, little boogie. I want to have fun. Like, I actually want to have fun, and I don't understand why this is the norm and we're putting up with this. I know half of us are not putting up with it, but I feel like we're putting up with it too much. It's time to take a stand. I don't know how we would take a stand. I'm so red because I'm stressed. This is why I travel, because I'm like, you know what? I'm going to work and then I'm going to travel, because why the would I lock myself into a job for the rest of my life? I need to see the world. Like, I genuinely need to see the world and experience life. And I'm young and I'm lucky that I have that privilege of not having too many responsibilities, not having any little rats running around, you know what I mean? But like, Jesus Christ, it's going to make me cry. And I love you all. And if you're working and you're struggling, you're the and you deserve love and light and peace. Bye.
Okay, so Miss Thing clearly forgot to take her Adderall today or something. She does not seem okay in this video. Like, can we do a check, like a wellness check?
I actually think this should be the commercial for what a manic episode looks like and why you should take your meds. Like, take your meds, take your meds, take your meds. This is not normal. This is bizarre. It's a lot to take in.
They're glorifying it. It's got millions of views and so many likes and fan comments. Like, they're glorifying this unhinged behavior.
Because they think that it's justified, right? Like, this is how much they truly believe they're victims and so oppressed because they have to work. Meanwhile, she's saying she has a privilege to travel all over the world. So I don't think she's working that hard or that oppressed or just really slugging it out. But they truly think that. Like, they genuinely are like, yes, stand up to the man, stand up against the system, stand up against this oppression. They are just so far removed from people who actually have struggles in this country, yet alone globally. It is shockingly disconnected from reality, and it reeks of privilege. It actually is just laughable. And again, it really, I truly feel like this person needs to take some medication. Like, even yourself out. It's not that big a deal. Go to work.
I also,
sit in air conditioning at a desk. I think you're okay.
Yeah, I think you're okay. But also, like, I just want to have fun and travel the world. Like, okay, who in society, if everyone just had fun and nobody worked and did anything, like, okay, where's all the food on your grocery store shelf, right?
Who's flying your plane?
Who's flying the plane?
Who's working the hotel you're staying in?
Hotel room. Yeah, exactly. It's like society has to run and operate, and you guys and these people who are so anti-work feel like they're just, as a human, entitled to just relax and do whatever they want. But they don't realize that would have to rest on the backs of other people working and hustling. Like, otherwise there would be nothing to go tour and enjoy and this lifestyle. How are she thinks she should be able to stay at home and order from Amazon and scroll TikTok and plan trips. But of course, the Amazon delivery truck driver still going to have to show up to her house. Her freaking Uber Eats is still going to have to show up. I mean, somebody's going to have to cook that food. Like, it's the entitlement for me that makes me a little nauseous watching these people.
It's annoying because, you know what? I too wanted to travel the world and work from home. And guess what I did? Worked my butt off to get there. Like, I don't have any sympathy for you. Very few people get to have those kinds of lifestyles. And you are fortunate to live in a country where if you really want to, you can work your butt off and do it too. But you usually have to slug it out for a little bit first and do a lot of dirty jobs and build and get there over time. And that's an amazing actual opportunity that you're given that many people throughout the globe still are not, that many people throughout history have not had. So I don't feel any sympathy for you whatsoever. You want to be one of the privileged few who gets to just travel around and people wait on you. Well, you better be exceptional. You better be exceptionally smart. You better be exceptionally talented. You better have an exceptional idea. Bring something to the table, make the money, and then go live that way. But to think that you should just have it handed to you and people should just wait on you hand and foot, I think makes you a pretty bad person, actually.
Yeah, I mean, you're essentially saying you're entitled to other people's labor and you're better than other people and you should be elevated above them. And the whole thing, it makes me really nauseous. And I get it. Like, some dumb chick somewhere says something dumb. But what depresses me more is that this has 1 million views and it's literally, most of them are positive. The comment section is mostly positive. Like, who are the people looking to these folks as role models? This woman has 400,000 followers on TikTok. And of course, her whole TikTok page is her traveling and like just living the life. And of course, complaining about her Uber drivers. It's like the audacity, her meeting Meghan Trainor. It's like, oh yeah, but you have to work so hard. Clearly, you're a travel TikToker. Jesus Christ, give me a break.
This is big Karen energy. All right, well, let's move on to our next crazy TikToker because fortunately for our content purposes, there are a plethora of them.
We can't raise the minimum wage. Why? Because small businesses wouldn't be able to afford it. Why? Because if they had to pay people more, they wouldn't be able to have as many people, or they'd have to raise prices on products in the store. So that means more people wouldn't go to the stores anyway. Why? Because people would rather go to Walmart or someplace that has a lot more stuff for cheaper. People like cheaper stuff. Why? Because not a lot of Americans have a great amount of disposable income. Why? Because minimum wage is only $7 an hour.
So this really made me want to pull my hair out as somebody familiar with basic economic data and reality. But just for she says that the reason people don't have disposable income is because the federal minimum wage is $7. I mean, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's about 1.5% of hourly paid workers earn the federal minimum wage. So not even all Americans, just look at hourly workers alone, 1.5% earn $7.25 or whatever the minimum wage is. It's $7.25 per hour, because most have earned a higher rate in the market or live in a place with a higher state or local minimum wage. So the entire premise of this is factually baseless. And then the flip side as well, she's saying there are a lot more reasons than just small businesses can't afford it to oppose raising the minimum wage. But she realized like she's shilling for Amazon. Amazon lobbies to increase the minimum wage because they know it will bankrupt mom and pops and help big corporations consolidate because they can afford it. And yet these progressive working there for the little guy, they don't realize they're literally on Team Jeff Bezos on this one.
She also she's so smug throughout the video. And I love when people really think they have this like gotcha that just lacks the basics of economics. Like she thinks that no economist has ever been, smart enough to think about this argument that she has. And she's really stumped everybody with this revelation that if you just paid people more, they could afford more expensive things. Like, I don't think she understands how disposable income works. The missing circle, piece of logic in her circle thing that she's doing right there is that when people's income raises and the price of goods raise, they still have the same amount of disposable income, right? Like they don't all of a sudden just have a lot more disposable incomes. If they're making more, prices of goods are more. And so they end up in pretty much the same position, just everything costs a bit more. That's not how you actually elevate people out of poverty. And it's just, I can't stand when there's these very obvious, like they're so close to actually understanding an economic cycle, and then they just, through their own arrogance, drop the ball and have the audacity to post something like this on TikTok and think that they're really doing a mic drop. It's ridiculous. You look silly. And I think until you're better informed, you should stay out of politics because you think you're helping people. But like you said, you're actually shilling for big corporations. You're actually shilling to make everything more expensive for everybody. And nothing that you're asking for would do anything to meaningfully alleviate poverty.
No, it wouldn't. And it's also funny because let's talk about the real reasons why disposable income is so low. Well, and it's not, but like why it's not higher. A huge one is inflation. People have had their paychecks eroded because of reckless government spending and money printing, as well as some international factors. But that's not something you're concerned about fixing clearly if you're supporting progressive economic policies. And because of taxes, we literally tax people's paychecks. We take a huge chunk out of every person. We have taxes on jobs, employment, and paychecks. Things that we should really want to encourage, not discourage. When you tax something, you discourage it. That's why we tax cigarettes, right? And yet, oh no, disposable income is too low because the minimum wage isn't higher when basically no one works at the federal minimum wage anyway.
And also, like, let's talk about the housing market, because that's where most people's income's going, right? It's going to their rent, their mortgage. Those are your biggest bills. People keep talking on TikTok about why those things are so expensive, eating away the bulk of the money they're bringing in. that is also due to government policies. That is also due to government preventing the expansion of housing, making it too expensive to build houses, making it too expensive to get the equipment and supplies that you need to build houses. That comes down to trade policies. It comes down to regulations. It comes down to zoning ordinances. It comes down to a lot of NIMBYism laws, like historic overlays and trying to keep neighborhoods looking a certain way. Like, if you are mad about people not having disposable income, you need to turn around and look in the mirror, because it has a lot to do with progressive policies. Period.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So up next for our anti-capitalism TikToks, we have one of this guy who was really horrified, and this is blown up, this TikTok. He was horrified at the idea that he encountered a 13-year-old working at a Chick-fil-A. Take a look.
You work here?
Yeah.
How old are you?
13.
Oh my God. Is that even allowed?
What?
Is that even allowed?
Yeah, it is.
13?
Yeah.
But do you know like your multiplication chart?
Oh, no, I know. So my dad owns the store.
Oh, your dad owns it?
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this was shared by a progressive union account on Twitter and has 2.6 million views. And they're clearly like railing against the horror of child labor being brought back in the US. And it's like, hold up. This is not 7-year-olds in like mills that we're talking about. This is a teenager working at his dad's store, probably for like 10 hours a week or something, getting great experience, customer service, learning hard work, making some pocket money. I don't see any problem with it. And I mean, I'm not somebody who thinks all child labor should be legal like some crazy libertarian, but the idea that young teenagers can have very modest and highly regulated amounts of working while in school doesn't horrify or shock me.
And in their own family store. Now, and also, like, why does he ask him if he knows his multiplication tables? As if you need to know what 10 times 10 is to serve fried chicken. Like, what?
And he's 13. Of course he does. Like,
yeah, what does it do with anything? But as a former child laborer myself, I do think most child labor laws are stupid. I worked under the table from the time I was 10 years old on, had some of my best jobs of all time doing that. My favorite one was I worked for Beanie Babies. This is how we legally got around it. But I worked for a store down the street from me when I was like 11, 12, during the Beanie Baby bubble, you know, when we thought they were going to really like help us all retire. And I got paid 2 Beanie Babies a day to run the cash register and do inventory and stock shelves. And I loved it. I think labor is great for kids as long as the conditions are safe, as long as, you know, the environment isn't threatening to them and they have supervision. Like, I think it's absolutely ridiculous that we try to prevent kids from working and learning basic skills. If anything, we need to introduce labor sooner for kids. We need to have more apprenticeships, more ways for them to start learning different skill sets so that they don't have to go to college and waste a ton of money when they're 18 on degrees that probably aren't even in fields they want to do. So I think we have this completely backwards as a society, but I mean, obviously, you know what unions are after. They have an agenda here, so not surprising they're going to try to go after this very wholesome scenario and try to paint it as this big, bad, scary thing happening in the labor market, and for why you need unions to come in and make sure everybody's safe and cozy.
I always love stuff where people prove the opposite of the point they think they're proving, and I think this falls into that category.
Definitely. All right, let's move on to the mailbag. Callie says, I learned a lot on the episode. Thank you.
And Chibigugu says, hi from South Africa. I think that's one of the cool things about podcasts, YouTube, whatever. Most of our viewers and listeners are in America, and then some are in Canada or England or Australia. But you'll see dots on those like glow maps of your analytics or whatever in Africa, in India, all over the place. On YouTube especially, I get a fair amount of Indian viewers. I just think that's really cool. The idea of like modern communications technology that we can sit here in our offices, at our houses, talk and have a conversation with people across the world.
It is very cool. And if anybody in South Africa wants to bring us in for an event, we're game. I'd love to visit South Africa.
I think
Brad's like, I'm not
speak for
game.
yourself there.
I'm not leaving my house. 84 Chad says, damn, conservatives are just as short-sighted as progressives. By the way, I think just about all of your takes are spot on. Big fan here. Hope your channel grows.
Yeah, very kind. And actually, I've gained like 10K subs on YouTube, which is where we post the podcast, in like the last month. So we are growing.
Yeah.
Dean says, and these are comments from your last episode from 2 weeks ago. Dean says, I like how Charles Barkley tells it like it is and doesn't care what other people think. Thanks for still posting on Facebook. I can see why you would rather use other platforms. I'm just middle-aged and too old for TikTok or Instagram. Yeah, we still post on Facebook, but it's definitely our total back burner because we're focused on reaching younger audiences on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Also, like Facebook is really crappy to creators, and it throttles links to your website and your videos, and all you can really get eyeballs on is like crappy meme posts and stuff. So we'll put some stuff up on there, but it's really killing itself off as a viable platform, in my opinion.
Well, this content, or the comment warmed my heart. It made me feel good because I do still post most of our actual content on Facebook. It's kind of like throwing spaghetti at a wall to see what sticks. They want you to basically pay for your own followers to just see your content. It's a useless platform. And like you said, they treat content creators terribly. It's just a weird graveyard kind of vibe these days. Like, it's not fun to hang out there. But when I saw this, I was like, oh, I am glad we still post here to reach people. So, all right. One other comment from that same video from Anthony said, everybody's cute to you, Hannah. Charles Barkley is cute, George Bush is cute, and they have a laughing emoji. Now, I don't think that's true. I think very few people are cute. And there is a big difference in being cute and hot that needs to be explained here. Charles Barkley is cute. I think he is an attractive guy, or he was in his heyday. George W. Bush, he's grandpa cute. Not like, actually attractive, just like old man cute. You kind of want to like hang out with him, maybe get a burger and a soda if you didn't know he was a warmonger. And then there's hot. And when we say people are hot at base politics, it has nothing to do with their physical appearance. It is a sapiosexual kind of hot, meaning we like how they think, we like how they're acting.
No, you're speaking for yourself here. Again, this is your weird view.
You picked it up, admit it. I've seen you do it. It's
only ironically.
But that is the breakdown. All right, on to hot takes. Mine this week is somewhat controversial. Especially because I work for an animal welfare organization as a fellow, and I do believe that we should be kind to animals, but I think it is probably okay to maybe sort of kind of poison carpenter bees. I hate them. They are a menace. Do you know what a carpenter bee is?
No.
Okay, I want to be clear. It's not cool to kill most bees. Most bees are really important, members of our society, and we need them in our ecosystem. Carpenter bees are about this big. They like to eat wood. They live in fences and greenways, and they come out and they bump you in the head, and they're always having sex together. So there's like two of them flying around. So they're really hard to get around. And honestly, I'm terrified of them. They don't sting very often, but they can. So it's kind of a, just a total crapshoot if you're going to get harmed by them or not. They're all over my greenway that I love. Phoenix keeps trying to eat them. They are on my patio. They're by my parents' pool. I hate these suckers. And I've read that you can use vinegar to deter them, but that also it might hurt them. And I'm kind of riding the ethical fence on this, but I think it might be acceptable to do.
Yeah, I don't care. I hate bugs, so bye-bye. So my hot take is that some MAGA people, not all, but some, are just as big snowflakes as the left that they love to call snowflakes. Because I posted this meme on my Instagram, and I have a lot of Republican and right-wing followers because we're aligned on a lot of things. And the meme is this. It's a picture of Trump and a picture of Stormy Daniels. And it said, the text of the meme says, Stormy Daniels said they had an affair. Donald Trump said they didn't. Who are you going to believe? The fake blonde with the big tits or Stormy Daniels? And I think whether you love or hate Trump, like that's just genuinely funny. Like and I posted it and said, all right, gotta admit, I laughed at this one. Within 20 minutes, 100 people unfollowed me on Instagram. Snowflakes. No. I'm sorry. You're freaking snowflakes. Like, take a joke. Even if you love the guy. I don't. But even if you do, take a joke.
Who even knew the boomers were on Instagram? Not me.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's funny. All right, guys. That's a wrap. We hope you enjoyed the episode. As always, leave us a comment, leave us a review, and we'll see you next week. Until then, stay based.